Let's be brutally honest right now. That's a big question.
I'm looking for someone who doesn't want to go to base camp, but they want to go to the very top.
Whether it's here, India, New York.
Civilization was born at happy hour.
That's what wins. That's what stands out. That's what people are interested in. That's what I want to know. The Hospopreneurs Podcast with James Henderson.
Hello and welcome back to the Hospopreneurs Podcast. Dan Sims, award-winning sommelier and CEO of Revel, the brand behind Pinot Palooza and Mould Cheese Festival, joins me today. From his early days working in some of Melbourne's top restaurants to creating international wine and cheese events across 14 cities and 6 countries, Dan has been a driving force in making wine accessible, inclusive, and fun. In this episode, Dan describes how hospitality powers his events, the significance of showcasing local producers, and how his business is adapting the festival model in a post-pandemic world. Hello and welcome to the show, Dan.
Mate, thanks so much for having me.
You are most welcome. Thank you. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you sitting down with me in the lead up to an event that you've got as well. You must be incredibly busy too.
Is the week before our Mould Cheese Festival in Melbourne. It's all happening at the Royal Exhibition Building, or will have happened at the Royal Exhibition Building.
By the time it comes out.
Comes out.
And I'm sure it was a great event. It went incredibly well. And I'm looking forward to listening back when this show's live.
Totally. It is. It's always funny the week before an event or festival, and it comes from that point where you're going, oh my God, is anyone going to come to this party? And then it shifts in that last week to, okay, oh my God, okay, everyone's coming to the party. How do we get this room set? Is everything going to be okay?
If there's one thing I've learned about events, it's that everything happens in the last minute. Like everything happens in the last minute. People buying tickets, the event coming together, you know, if you've got contractors, obviously bumping in, bumping out doesn't happen until the event itself. So yeah, it's crazy.
It is crazy. I think I've been doing, I suppose, festivals now for over a decade, which is terrifying even just saying that out loud. But I feel like now we've got a system, and it's like these things, like doing a pop-up restaurant. You know, we do it like 7 or 8 times a year. And in some ways, it's like Christmas, right? Christmas happens on the same day every year, and we always freak out a week or so before Christmas, like, oh my God, what are we doing? But it's like that Groundhog Day of going, okay, yeah, we know what's going to happen. We know we're chasing producers. We understand this. This is what we do. And we can either fight it or go with the flow with it. Because at the end of the day, when the curtain goes up at 5 o'clock on Friday night, that's it. The show's on.
Yep.
And then we just roll.
I've certainly seen in those 10 years that social media attendance numbers have been far less reliable in my experience. Have you seen a change in the way that people have purchased tickets, say as consumers? Are they more last minute, or do they plan more? Or I'm just wondering your experience in the events industry.
It's a bit of yes and no. As a general observation, yes, the last 10 days of an event is where you see a lot of it. Like for this week, it'll be about a third of the tickets, but there's always markers through any sort of sales activity where you know if you have a really good launch, you know where you're going to get to, because you can always bank, was it 20 or 30% in the last 10 or so days. But then also in other cities where we operate, every city has its own personality and it changes, and every city has its own economic conditions. And recently we were just in Brisbane. The event sold out 2 weeks before we even got there. So we look at that and go, wow, we could probably get in another 1,000 or 1,500 people if there were tickets available. But I suppose from our point of view with our festivals, whether it be Mould or Pinot Palooza, my philosophy has always been more people doesn't mean a better event. No one wants to buy a ticket and then stand in a line for 4 hours. That's a really bad experience. Punters hate it because they're doing that. The producers who exhibit, they find it really hard because everyone's a little bit frustrated. So what we really do is we cap the numbers per session to ensure that, and we've literally have a ratio, and this is of our punter to producer ratio. So we have something to that, but we've been doing this long enough that we have a number that we go for, and anything above that, then we know it gets a bit too hard, but we have that rule. And even if it's lower, then we know where it's going to be. So, but it's like in restaurants, it's like on the quietest night, you have a higher spend per person. Mm-hmm. So, and just because you're busy doesn't mean you're more profitable or it's generating sort of more revenue, so to speak. So it's like even with the makers who come to our events, they can only really see X amount of people per session, regardless of whether there's 500 people in the room or there's 5,000 people in the room. each sort of opportunity to interact with guests who come through, it's limited. So in terms of like, we've been doing Pinot Palooza for over a decade, and I think we've built a really lovely bit of brand equity there. Mould, our cheese festival's been going since 2017, and one thing we know is people love cheese, and we're quite lucky they love Pinot Noir. Funnily enough, they're both things that I really like as well. So funny that. Just putting on a party for myself. But yeah, I think people are purchasing tickets and looking for experiences and want to do it in a way that they can bring their friends with as well. I think, wine by default for me is social. That's with Pinot Palooza, and cheese, nothing. You also share cheese with friends. Mm-hmm. Like you buy, normally.
We talked a little bit about this before the episode, and I buy a lot of cheese a week. I'm not going to admit how much on the show, but yeah, in that case, it's not with friends. But
think about it as a cheese board.
Most normal people do.
Yeah, you have a cheese board and you share it with people. So I think it's that trying to replicate that social occasion. But the markets, events have had a wild ride, right? And it's been festivals, same with all businesses through, the spicy coffee years. I'm not going to say the C word.
Yes.
Festivals or mass gatherings, they were the first to go and they were the last to come back. Things literally stopped. We were 5 days away from our Mould festival in Brisbane, and it just stopped. And everything was paid for. Everything. We were all good and ready to go, and the producers had made the cheese. So that's when we sort of developed our Mould Cheese Collective, which was our COVID side hustle of sending cheese boxes all over the country, because we were saying, because all the cheese producers they would normally sell to restaurants had shut down. So it was this sort of snowball effect into there. And I think even as we got out of those COVID years, people were still hesitant on large packed mass gatherings. So it was, I sort of saw it as a way to go, okay, right, well, if we're going to reset events, what do we do? What does that look like? How many people is enough?
And have the answers to those questions changed since pre-COVID?
Yeah, definitely. Like for our big festival, Pinot Palooza, which was the first one, and even through that, I was looking through some of the photos through the COVID years, and it was like, I call it the Pinot Mosh Pit years. Like it was the Royal Exhibition Building was like 4,000 people in the room at once. It was just packed in there, and there was like spittoons. There was open buckets of people spitting out wine, and you look at it going, oh my God, like that's so weird and so foreign. So when we were resetting, it was like, how do we change the event model to something that is still fun but still a little bit more contained? And hence we would do more session-based, and we worked really hard on trying to, okay, what is the right amount of people per session to ensure that we can still have a good vibe but just be a little bit contained so we can manage that. And how do we deal with spittoons, which took me a number of months to figure it out. But
what have you done?
Well, spittoons are so gross. Like I still can't believe you used to make someone, go and get the buckets and empty them. Like it's just so disgusting. But we now have like custom made, basically like bins that we have, whether it's through sawdust or mulch in there, which we have in a garbage bag, and we have them per session and just swap them over. So it's not open. It is open, but it's a lot depth. So it's a little bit safer. It's on ground level, not in front of people. So it's all those like little things that we want to tweak ahead of any event, because, you want it to be a really great experience. And that's the same whether you're going to a restaurant or, a wine bar or wherever. You want to have a really great experience. So spitting over someone's shoulder is not exactly right one.
You've got quite a lot of industry experience as well in hospitality, and particularly in and around wine. You can quite clearly see how that has developed into having a wine event, a large consumer wine event. I'm wondering, what are the things that you picked up in the industry that you've applied that are a lot more directly applied in the work that you have done and that you've built?
I'd say everything. A wise person once said, asked me this one question, is like, what is the industry that you're in? If you answer that question, then everything else can frame it around. Now, off the back, I could look at it and go, well, I'm in the events business. Kind of am I? Am I in wine or am I in the cheese business? But the one thing I wholeheartedly believe, our core competency is and business that we're in is hospitality. And that anchors everything that we do. And that speaks to community in terms of the producers who come and also the people who attend. So that idea of hospitality is first and foremost. So like people who attend our event, I don't see them as ticket holders, I see them as guests. The producers who come to our festivals, I don't see them as exhibitors, I see them as investors. We don't have any major sponsors, or, if we did, I wouldn't have a sponsor, I'd have a partner. So, and having that's the intent. So people are coming into a restaurant, it's first and last impressions. They're the biggest key.
The ones that stay with you.
They're the ones that stay with you, the things that you remember. And if you go to a restaurant, you have a really great meal, that you greeted, you sat down, and then you get into the flow. And then it always used to annoy me when you're trying to get the bill and you can't get anyone's attention because the whole rest of the staff are just cruising around. You can't get their eye attention. It's that last impression that really sticks with you. So it's sort of playing that into it. Again, everyone wants to get into the event really fast. And then when they leave, like we make sure that all the staff say, thanks so much, get home safe. We want that first and last impression to be key. And I think that goes through all the way through in terms of how we run the festival, run a session. I see it like a restaurant service. We literally have a briefing half an hour before doors open where we gather all of the producers and I make them all come together. And like this weekend, there'll probably be about 350 people in front, and we literally go, right, this is what's going to happen. This is what's going over the next few days. And we really do it as a bit of a rev up to get them.
Psych them up.
To psych them up because, you're doing a festival, and as I like to say, is like, look, just so you know, I'm sure everyone's feeling a little bit tired from the week. It's been a pretty hectic, period of time. But guess what? We've got 5,000 people who are turning up who do not care how tired you are. So put on a happy face and let's go and do this. Like, let's be hospitable and put on a show.
Yeah, perfect. It sounds just like Friday, Saturday service.
It is. It is.
Great.
And you sort of brief them in and go, right, this is what's going to happen. And even like to how you talked about bump in and bump out, or bump in particular. Like, I get really paranoid. I want to make sure that the room is set before the producers and our investors come in, because you want that room to feel comfortable. And it's like if someone comes over to your house for dinner and an hour early and you're not ready, the table's unset, you haven't set your prep, but there's like, yeah, sure, but you just start off on this really awkward.
On the back foot.
You're constantly on the back foot. So we work really hard to make sure, okay, the room's set, everything's in a straight line, everything's really great. And what that does is if a producer walks in and goes, okay, these guys are under control. But if we were running around like headless chicken, there we go, oh, God, what are they doing? Oh, they're really stressed, and that's going to flow through to them. Oh my God, how's it going to go? And then that'll eventually flow through to the customer in front of them. So that sort of hospitality mindset has always been at the core of everything we do, I think. And that goes back down to how communication, especially with wine, we work really closely with the wine producers and we say, you've got 30 seconds to a minute in front of somebody to tell your story. Don't bamboozle them with winemaking bullshit. Tell them who you are, where you're from, why it's so special is people connect to people.
Yeah.
They don't connect to stainless steel tanks. And there's a time and a place to be really nerdy about wine, but at a festival.
Yeah, not at a consumer event.
No, exactly. And also have a bit of fun with it. But I think, all in all, the hospitality it's everything, for any winery or any cheesemaker, that's a core because we're dealing with people.
I want to ask you a little bit more about Mould, because we are talking about it's the lead up to Mould as well. And as we said, by the time this episode comes out, it will have come and gone. But a lot, and you just described there before that Pinot Palooza has been around much longer. But I actually want to ask you a question that I ask every episode, which is why you do what you do. So I kind of want to broaden it a lot more. So we sort of touched on a few things there, but I want you to kind of elaborate for me on why it is that you do everything that you do.
Yeah, asking me that question the week before running a festival was kind of like, oh my God, you're right. Why do I do what we do?
You must be asking yourself.
I'm asking the same question. But I think it's, again, goes back to the idea of hospitality. And I love the creating things and the building of a brand and also of a community. And I know that sounds a little bit, woo-woo, but it's true. Like one of the best things I loved about Palooza, was we had a group of, really great like-minded producers coming on tour, and it was in a collaboration, not competition. And then the same for Mould. And I should say as well, Mould is unapologetically 100% Australian cheese. It's all about Australian cheese and all about supporting small, independent artisan producers. And that's really why we wanted to do the event, was to amplify just how good Australian cheese was. And now, not hard, I've learned so much about Australian cheese, and the quality and diversity of styles of the cheeses within this country are absolutely mind-blowing. And also, it's really something that we should celebrate and support, because without it, we will literally lose them. And they are farmers and they work bloody hard. So what I do love about with something like Mould, where it's evolved to a point where it's no longer yours, it sort of becomes this collective. And that's the part that I really like. And that's the why do we do what we do, is to sort of shine a spotlight on these producers. And it's a real shot in the arm for them sometimes, because it gives them an opportunity to talk and engage with people who really do support Australian cheese.
Quite clearly, there's a connection between wine and cheese. But what made you want to start another event in the cheese?
Yeah, well, funnily enough, through my sommelier career, I got to meet some pretty amazing people. One of those was Nick Haddo from Bruny Island Cheese. And a number of years ago, it was the annual Sommeliers Ball for any sommelier veterans can remember. It was pretty wild. It was good fun times. And Nick Haddo had this cheese presented. It was this raw milk cheese. It was the first raw milk cheese in Australia. And we literally, the whole room tasted this cheese, full of hospitality, legends. And we were just blown away. And you're going, okay, wow, Australian cheese this is the potential that we've got. So back in 2016, Nick said, hey, look, I've got an idea. I want to do a cheese festival around Australian cheese. And I was like, I'm in. He barely finished the sentence. And I was like, I was all about it, because so many people love cheese, but also as an opportunity to learn more about it and then amplify that. I think that's really what festivals do, and also will not only shine a spotlight on it, but celebrate and champion. And what a festival is, it's an exercise in time, because from a guest perspective, for a relatively low investment, you get to taste and learn about so much about Australian cheese in a very short period of time. Whereas, from an exhibitor point of view, you get to do the same thing. You get to see a range of different customers, get direct feedback for a relatively low investment for a very short period of time. So that opportunity there is to learn and discover and grow it and see it evolve. I think that really sparked, I suppose, the brand entrepreneurial brain part of me to see. And then it has fast become, it's our biggest event. Like Mould this weekend will be the biggest celebration of Australian cheese the country's ever seen. It's one of the biggest events we've ever run. But also I think there's a really great thing about that to highlight for Australian cheese producers, that there is a huge amount of interest and support for Aussie cheesemakers, because where we put our food dollars all the time is important. Where we put our food dollars right now is absolutely critical. So people come along and they'll buy cheese direct. We were in Brisbane about 4 weeks ago, here from Brisbane, and they came out hard. Like it was about 1 kilo of cheese per person. So it was close to 3 ton of cheese sold and consumed at Mould. If the way it's going to be like 5 ton. And that's 5 ton of a great Australian cheese. Like it is epic.
I don't want to calculate how much I have a year, because it might be close, to be honest with you. But Dan, I want to ask you, just in that same sort of vein, because we're now talking about why you do what you do, talking about these events. What is it that you're aiming towards? What does success ultimately look like for your sort of collection of work, your businesses, and you're involved with a not-for-profit as well, and I'm wondering how that all sort of shapes in together in your career?
It's a really good question, and probably a multitude of answers to it. I think for the first part, with the event side of things, to see it grow to a size that is really sustainable, I think, and I don't want to grow it too big, but that is of benefit to the producers. Like I'd love to have more and more producers and more people celebrating Australian cheese. Absolutely. For Pinot, I'd love to see it get over to more cities.
Where are you guys at the moment?
So for Mould, we've Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane. We go to Perth. We do a combined Pinot Palooza and Mould event in Perth. Hobart we've been to. We may go back there again this year. We're not sure, depending on the calendar. But Pinot Palooza, or BC, before COVID, we were in 14 cities and 6 countries. And that was really exciting. I would love to get back to that point with Palooza, because it was something really special about going overseas, and particularly Japan, or whether it be Singapore or Hong Kong and New Zealand as well. Like you get on tour with the makers and there's a real collegiate vibe. I really love that part. But I think the brands alone have I would love the brands to be their own thing. It's not about one person. It's not about me. Certainly not about me. You'd be hard pressed to find my name on the Mould website. You'd be hard pressed to find my name on the Pinot Palooza website. We're the sort of conductor behind the scene.
Yeah. On that note, just quickly as a tangent to the tangent, I think I reached out via the website somewhere a long time ago to get in touch and didn't hear back until someone else pitched you to me, because I couldn't even find you. Yeah. I had a bit of a look. So,
but that's also done deliberately. We don't want it to be about one person. and for the cheesemakers, we want to celebrate them. We want to celebrate the producers. And that kind of leads into on the board of Wine Victoria, became chair of Wine Victoria last year. Huge responsibility. Now our role is to advocate on behalf of the Victorian wine industry or community, as I like to say. And that's been a really exciting role. And it's a particularly challenging time in wine at the moment, but there's a range of different programs and really helping empower and I suppose motivate and like I call myself the cheerleader to support Victorian wineries. You know, I'm fiercely Melburnian. As you can see, I'm wearing all black. You know, it's our native dress, and I love Victorian wine and Pinot Noir. Like in Victoria, is like the best in the country without doubt. Outside of Australia as well, like we go head to head with Burgundy. I don't mind, and that's like, and you know, that sounds.
We don't want any arguments. There's no
need to argue because it's a fact. It's like jokes aside, like I truly believe in Victorian wine, and literally as we're recording this, it's Drink Victorian Wine Month, and so that's been a really great thing as well, a campaign to get behind and talk about and highlight great Victorian wines in restaurants. So, and that part I really love because again, it comes back down to community and building that idea and being there as a support. And also I hope to sort of lead and motivate. And I think anything in particular, the wine industry at the moment is crying out for diverse, brave new leadership. And I'm very proud of the board that we've got. It's a very diverse board. Our CEO, Stephanie Dubinen's incredible. We work really closely with Global Victoria. And also our previous chair, Andrew Bradway, is an absolute legend in the wine industry. So having those thought leaders come through and encouraging the next generation of leaders to come through, I think that's absolutely key. And I think that goes back to, again, my sommelier days through Sommeliers Australia and education programs. I always thought it was my job to teach somebody how to do my job. And but a girl who works for me, Jess, who's my 2IC at the moment, she in every interview goes, they asked the HR person, asked the classic, you know, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And said, I want Dan's job. And I was like, awesome. you can have it. I would love nothing more than to be made redundant.
It's important, I think. It's something that you described there around right at the end, because I know we've talked about a lot of things. So it was a very big question and we went a lot of different ways with it. But I think that process of imparting as much knowledge as you can to teach someone to be able to do more of your job so they can do it, so you can move on to something else or whatever your objective is with it. If you want to stay in it, sure. But I think that's important in that leadership role, to be teaching people to be able to do what you're doing so that you have the flexibility to do other things as well. It's, good to hear that.
Yeah, I think especially with wine, right? We were having a quick conversation before we were recording about WSET and the importance of that and that course, which is key. It's like,
I'm doing the level 3 at the moment. Listeners may not know.
Which is amazing, and that's a really big effort, and to be dedicated to do it, which is incredible. So I think it's particular with wine, how we talk about wine as a sommelier and or as a wine educator or as a wine person, people out there. It's a real difference between taking quite a complex topic like wine, but then filtering it down to something that people can understand. And I call it more like empowerment through communication. Not everyone is going to be as interested in wine as you or I are. And, you know, what we want to do is empower them with enough information for them to make a decision and also help them find a wine that they like. And also the same with cheese. You know, what do you like? People always ask me, what wine should I drink? It's like, it's not up to me. Yeah. It's up to you.
And you learn that in hospo. You learn that in hospo because people will come in and go, what's good? Or like, what's the best cocktail? Like, it's a very consumer question.
And I understand it.
It makes sense that they ask it.
But it's like, for me, I think it's like, what is the occasion? What's the utility? You know, why are you buying this wine? How are you enjoying it? Are you in a restaurant? You're going over to a mate's place for a Tuesday night, or, you know, is it a date night? Obviously you drink Pinot Noir if it's a date night. You know, is it a celebration? Why? What is that utility? And it's like the same with music, right? There's so many different styles of music, so many different genres. What's the best kind of music? Yeah. It depends on what you feel like at the day, or, you know, like what's the best kind of movie? Most critics want you to watch some weird art house movie 7 days a week, but that's just not going to work. That's what wine is like. The wine tells you have to watch the art house movie, but you know what? Sometimes I just want to watch the Avengers or Star Wars, but I don't want to feel guilty about it because I've had a really hectic day and I just want to have something nice that I can just chill out with. So it's like, that's okay across all of it. But wine by default is in this, we feel we have to teach you about the process, all the stuff that's in the middle of how it's made, whereas most people get the happy vineyard or happy cow equals delicious steak. What happens in the middle is important, but I don't want to learn about it when I'm having dinner because that's not the fun bit. Like, really good vineyard, nice wine and story, because people connect to people regardless of anything. That's the key.
And often I've found, because I've worked a lot in a whole range of venues, very much high-end service with much lower volume through to sacrificing some of that service for the higher volume as well. And I definitely think that some of these things like, when people ask you, what do you like, is obviously going to be very different to what they will like or what they should have. Because people say, what's the best drink? What's the best cocktail? What should I have? It's like the best cocktail is the one that you like the most, and I'm going to try to find that by asking you some questions.
Exactly.
That's essentially the job of that person in that role.
100%. And that comes back down to the role of the sommelier is to figure out what you like to within your price point, to match it to your dish within 30 seconds to a minute.
Because they have a knowledge of everything in the middle that you described there, right?
Yeah, that's their job. Same with a retail store or cheesemonger or anywhere. Like, I'm going there because I want a really good experience. And again, like that sommelier elevator pitch, really, that 30 seconds to a minute, is applying that to even an event environment, because you still got to narrow things down as to what style of wine are you looking for? Asking questions. Start with hello, have a conversation and try and work out, have they tried your wines before? What sort of style of wine do they like, or Pinot or cheese? What sort of style do you like? And help them, empower them in terms of finding something that they might enjoy. And it's okay. Like, I stand by all the cheeses at Mould. Now, all the cheeses there are fantastic, great examples of where they're from and how they're made and the style that they're going for. Now, the question is then, what style do you prefer? And that's fine. Like, same with Palooza. Like, all the wines of Pinot Palooza, they're all great, but it's really up to you about to what style of wine do you prefer. I could get very nerdy about the whole point system, but it's like around wine, because we have, this wine's 96 points. It's like, well, that still doesn't really tell you if you're going to like it. You could still put 96-point Pinot Noirs in front of somebody, or in front of me or you or whomever, and we're going to have a different preference. So I actually really like lighter body style. I like more medium. This is the sort of style that I go for, but that's okay. But I think I think we're lucky in particular, say, we're in Melbourne in Australian hospitality. It has grown and evolved and matured so much over the last, couple of decades since I've been doing it. And I think that stems from, which I get when there's so much pressure in the system, whether it be hospitality or wine or wherever, there is an inherent curiosity of people now around food or drink or wine or cheese or anything. And it's that curiosity which is the greatest asset you could possibly want in a customer. And we see that.
Has that changed? Has that grown?
I think absolutely has it grown.
Are they more curious or more educated about
bit of both,
whatever it is?
I think. And that makes sense though, right? Because we scroll, I don't know if it's a stat's probably out of date, but it's like basically the height of the Statue of Liberty every single day on our phone. We're surrounded by information. It's shot to us super fast. How on earth do you think you can keep my attention with one particular type of wine for like a day, let alone a month through a year? There's more wine producers out there. There's more spirits and drinks and beers. There's more cheese out there. So that curiosity goes in. I want to taste and explore and get to know that story between more and more people.
So how can suppliers or producers of these products, how can they achieve longevity in their businesses?
I think the biggest challenge into the spectrum of cheese, I think people want to support local cheese, but also what they do need is access. So they want to be able to get to it. So whether it be at farmers markets, whether it be with cheesemongers, restaurants, yes, to a point, or even retail stores. I even walked in my local Black Arts the other day and I could buy some cheese there, which is fantastic. And Meat Smiths is around the corner from me. I love going there. You can get all of these, wine and cheese and everything. It's access. I hope what festivals do is we're like a big farmers market for Mould, where you can come along and taste a whole range of products and build your own cheese plate to entertain at home. And then for Pinot, you get to taste a whole range of different Pinots that you can buy direct, or it'll give you a framework for the next time you're out in a restaurant or a retail store to understand what you like. But really, it's getting in front of people. I think that's the best thing, because at the end of the day, the product or the wine or you will do the storytelling.
I'd like to ask you, Dan, a little bit more on part of your answer from a previous question, and that's when you were talking about being across a number of countries previously and where things are now, what is that gap that's got to be bridged for you to be there again?
Well, getting for overseas for events is a number of things.
For anyone out there who might have their own event and be hoping to do something like that, or maybe they've been impacted similarly and they're trying to navigate it themselves, or people just interested.
Yeah, I think it's the whole strategy post-COVID was let's rebuild the foundation. Our home turf was always really key, and to mitigate as much risk as possible. Doing an event overseas just turns up the risk factor like 5-10 times. Events in general are risky. It could be high risk, high reward, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work like a lot. So to be able to get back overseas is really a case of, are the producers ready to come with you? If you can't get them to come with you, then that you have no event. And at the moment, where things are at, I think whether in the wine industry, I'll probably focus on that one to start with, because to do an event like Pinot Palooza overseas again, it's expensive. For a producer, they've got to fly over there, they've got to do accommodation. So I think we are looking at doing a smaller test case in Singapore, maybe towards the end of the year, just to see how that goes, but build a range of not just one event, but a series of them to make it worthwhile for a producer to fly over and do that. But then also the producer's got to have enough product to sell. In particular, the case of Pinot.
Be exporting and obviously...
You've got to be export ready, so you've got to have all those other factors. And there's certainly grants and programs available for that that producers can tap into. I think for the start off, I'd love to you almost rebuild. You sort of start at Singapore and then maybe we'd go, I'd love to get back to Japan selfishly, because Japan is just like the greatest country. I love it. It's so much fun.
There's a recent episode at the moment that we flesh out a little bit on Japanese culture in a different industry. But I just kind of want to understand that more. What is it, the interest from the consumer isn't there as much, or
no, not at all?
What is it?
In terms of going over, so again, that curiosity I talk about. I was recently at FinExpo. One of the biggest observations that I had, and a number of people had, was a lot of younger people, funnily enough, diverse, being there, being very curious, asking a lot about wine. Now that is fantastic. With China reopening, it's a really huge opportunity for Australia to reset the way we talk about our wines. During the period that sort of things with the tariffs have been high, we know that they've missed us. That was the vibe that we got from FinExpo. And again, we can go back into that market but tell a different story. China's a different country to what it was, where Australia's a different country to where it was. Our wines are different. So I think there's a real opportunity there. But, in Japan or Singapore, there is a curiosity across all sectors around that. But it's around how do you bring enough producers over to make it worthwhile for everybody? And I think that's just going to take a bit of time. I'm the last person who needs to be convinced about going to doing an event in another city. Cheese is a different challenge, and that gets very technical in terms of to be able to export. It's a license and it's a whole range of paperwork. I won't get into it. I'm just being very sort of general with it. So it's quite limited, especially the artisan world. It's really geared up for big production, which is a real issue and challenge, because as quality and assurance that is, we miss out on the nuance and the artisan. And the other challenge is that the regulations that Australia have to be able to export artisan cheese is more strict than the European cheeses that we import. So I could go down the rabbit hole there, but I won't. But just ask yourself why that cheap French cheese is they're not air frying it over. I can tell you that right now, listeners. Think about that. Is that defrosted cheese? Anyway,
are you navigating that on behalf of the producers that you're working with?
I think it's
or is that something that they've got to have all those
they've
licenses,
got to have that
paperwork?
Yeah, they've got to have those licenses and paperwork ready, which will take time. But I know, again, if we did something in Singapore, people would love it. But again, it's like, are they ready? Can they do that production? If they do that, can they continue that supply? So again, it's a lot of in an already sort of pressure system with their, hanging on domestically to then to be able to go, well, let's just go over to Singapore. That's a challenge. And that can come through support from other agencies, government agencies and advocacy bodies on behalf of that, but that will take time. But wine's a bit easier. It doesn't go off in, a few weeks.
Yeah. I want to ask you, Dan, what is it that you're learning about or exploring at the moment? And I ask this question deliberately broadly
Yep.
I'm interested to know what you're learning about or exploring.
About 6 months ago, I bought a property, my first property in South Gippsland, and it was 20 acres in Foster North. And I am learning so much about having to manage a farm at the moment. That's really been my personal life of I own a chainsaw now and I have an angle grinder and I'm learning about planter boxes and I had my first burn pile the other day. I didn't blow myself up, which was very exciing.
Good, well done.
Which was great.
Good.
I know, it was just like I had to get it's like, how do I do this without exploding everything? But well, I'm learning a lot about the farm, and that for me is a really nice reset for me in my day-to-day. I think I call myself an extroverted introvert, where you do events and festivals, you're on all the time, and then I need to retreat to the country to exhale, to regroup and think creatively and go, okay, what's the next thing? So I've been learning lots about my land and the cows and the seasons and observing that. I think that's been really absolutely fantastic and I love. But then through work, I've been learning so much about cheese. Like, cheese is fascinating. It really is. It's sort of...
What's something you learned recently?
I start getting really curd nerdy about the cultures with cheese, about the cultures that they use to basically, kick off the whole fermentation, get it working. And it's kind of like a wild yeast thing for wine. And I can't help but look at it through the lens of my wine experience. And I just find it fascinating how, why don't we have our own cultures, our cheese starter cultures in Australia? Like, why don't we? And so, it's like having native hops or the beer or local ingredients for gin and things like that. Like Australian cheese is so interesting. Imagine if we had our own cheese cultures or who is doing it and how. And there's a lot of, again, curd nerdy reasons why that is and challenges to go with it. But I find it really fascinating to get a truly unique and amazing artisan cheese that comes from that place, because cheese really is an expression of terroir, like the ultimate expression of terroir, more so than wine. And I know that sounds really weird, me saying that, but it's true, because it's a really good artisan cheese is a direct result of what that cow had eaten at that time of year to produce the milk to then produce the cheese, or sheep or goat. It is such a translation from paddock to plate. It's fascinating. I find it so interesting. And yes, terroir with wine, 100%. But there's so many other manipulations that can happen, or interventions or non-interventions with winemaking. But cheese is, when you talk to cheesemakers, they go, oh yeah, we just do this at this particular time. Or when is that? Oh, just when it feels like this. It's like, what do you mean? It's like when it feels like, when you've got your arms in there, you're doing this. And I'm like, what is there a number? He said, no, it's just a feel. It's so fascinating. And seeing it grow and evolve, like with Australian cheese, it's fascinating.
I definitely want to open that up. I wish we had more time to do so. I'm just going to ask you the last few questions before we wrap up the program. And one is just to elaborate slightly more on kind of a passing comment that you made in the previous answer about kind of retreating and thinking creatively. I'm wondering what your creative process is. How do you actually go about coming up with ideas? I usually ask this question as quite a large question in 3 parts. And one is the ideation of concepts, of creative ideas. And then how do you play with them? And ultimately then how you execute them. Because we only really see, anyone who doesn't work with you or know you personally would only see how you execute. So I'm interested in the other parts of that process.
Yeah, it is a really great question. And the creative process is a long one, I think. It's a thing of sitting with it. The first question is this a good idea? But then you got to sit with it for a lot, play it out in your head. And I do that. I could be on the paddock, I could be driving the car, I could be, on my bike. Just sit with the idea and let it evolve. Pressure tested to a point, but also just let it go. And I think sometimes with those creative ideas, like, what is it and who is it for? And what role will it play and how will people react to it? It's like, and that poses a bit of a foundation. But then, it's like, it's really sitting with it. How long that takes is, I suppose, depends on the idea. But it also really comes back down to, you probably use as an example, like through COVID with Pinot Palooza, everyone was saying to us, okay, well, you just do Pinot Palooza online or do cheese online. It's like, well, okay, cheese I kind of get because it's easy, because the whole point of an event or a festival is discovery. You want to go to an event to discover something. So how do you replicate that virtually? So you can do that with cheese relatively easy, because you can cut up multiple different types of cheese and you can ship it to somebody and they can taste it. and you can do an online experience. I was like, okay, great. Okay, let's do that. And funnily enough, through COVID, I was like, for my team, and we said, okay, right, guys, we have one job, and that's to solve this. Now, I'm pretty sure if we can figure out how to do an event in another country where we don't even speak the language, I'm quite sure we can figure out how to get a box of cheese to someone in another state. We have one job, let's go. And literally within like 2 weeks, we'd set up this cheese business. So, but then comes back to something like Pinot Palooza. Okay, what is Pinot Palooza about? Again, it's an idea of discovery, tasting multiple wines in a really fun environment. So wine was the biggest challenge. It was like going, okay, well, how do we do it? Well, we have to send them 6 bottles of wine at minimum, and that's going to cost a lot of money. And then the other one is like the moral dilemma going, I don't think we should be encouraging people to open 6 bottles of wine at the same time during a really stressful period. Like that's wrong. Like we shouldn't do that. So then it came to going, okay, well, how do you then solve that? So we parked Palooza for a bit to really sit on it and go, okay, we'll focus on Mould for the moment. We'll come back to Palooza because we need to solve that part. And that was a lot of, how do we do? Do we do in vials? Do we do this? Or how do we create this fun environment? And we ended up partnering with the guys at Curative, which is Matt Sanger and the team there. Fantastic. The 150ml can cocktails, which is brilliant. And he's like, I reckon we could do wine in can. I was like, that's it. And then the next thing was like, okay, well, I think I've got the process. Now I've got to convince the winemakers. And I spoke to one winemaker in particular. It was Charteris Wines, it was PJ. And it's like, I was like, I've got this crazy idea. Just go with me here. And he's like, oh, I don't know about that, Dan. I don't know about putting my wine in can. It's a bit, and he's like, well, PJ, I've already done it. And I'm sending you some samples.
To confirm you're okay with it.
To confirm that you're okay with it. And he got them, was like, actually, that was really good. So then I was like, okay, we're on to something. And then it goes down that process of, okay, right, well, who do we get involved? So we ended up doing like 12 150ml cans. And then we did an online event. People got to do a tasting experience that was fun. They were all properly labelled as their own brand. And we did an online event. And we had DJs and we were hanging out. We became a virtual version of what Palooza could be. But that took a lot of time and processing and testing and sitting with it. But really, I think throughout that period was an example of like, what is the brand? What is it? What does it stand for? Can we replicate it in a different format and be really true to the brand of what it stands for? And yes, we could have done the masterclass route. Yes, but that would have appealed to 5% of our audience and we would have ignored the other 95. I don't know about you, but watching someone talk about wine on camera was boring before COVID. Just because we were at home bored didn't make it more interesting. It was still boring. So we had to make it fun. But I think that the creative process, it just takes time. I think for me, I've got to sit with it. And again, being in Gippsland helps.
Do you always start with a problem? What you described there sounded like you start with something. What about in a case where you're looking for a new problem?
I think it's probably looking for different opportunities and where things are headed. And it's like anything Henry Ford said once, if you asked the customers what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. But sometimes you've got to create it to fix it. And I think it's around looking at the lay of the land. And, as an example, say wine, people say, young people aren't drinking wine at the moment. It's like, well, no, they are. They're just not drinking it how they used to drink it. They're exploring, they're tasting things from so many other people. They're drinking less more often because, and that's at complete odds with a 750ml bottle of wine because it goes off in the fridge within 24, 48 hours. Milk doesn't go off in the fridge. Like wine as a product is quite ridiculous. Like really, if you were pitching wine today, I can tell you right now, you would not be pitching it in a 750ml bottle. So there's challenges around, again, packaging and things like that. That's probably things I'm probably talking about something that's in my mind at the moment, which I'm running through that process. So then it becomes like, how do you convince everybody? How do you convince the producers? How do you then convince the audience? I think the audience is already there, but they don't have the opportunity yet. So it's how to sort of solve that. But also I think it's looking at like whether it be wine or cheese or whatever, it's looking at macro influences. Wine is a sort of stat, like a few $1 billion industry. If you look at health and wellness, it's a $4 or $5 trillion industry. Now you're going to tell me that probably has more impact from a customer's point of view or a consumer point of view, has a greater influence than a marketing campaign done by a single winery. Like there's macro factors applying.
Some of the questions I have and a couple of things you've said have sort of touched on economics in a way, some of the terms you've used. But I wonder how are these industries, markets measured? How do they come up with that? Like, I wonder, sometimes the boundaries of them are very broadly defined. And I certainly know writing sales pitches, people will just pull in some numbers from here that you find everywhere. So I do question some of how big some of these markets are. And it's not something that I want to elaborate on in this episode, but around non-alcoholic wine and spirits is something that has come up a lot more recently, because you talked about health and wellness, better for you, that sort of world, combined with wine, which is more directly what we're talking about. I can see you've got something you want to say.
The low and no is key, and that category is fascinating. I find it really fascinating. We did an event a few years back just on zero, no and low, and I find it really, really fascinating. In wine, it's a bit of a challenge because you're trying to glycerol character of alcohol is a real factor. But there are producers, in particular Victoria, Brown Brothers in New Zealand, Gießen, it's one of their fastest growing categories because they it makes sense for some grape varieties, not all. And I love that, it's a general trend. People have been moving towards lower alcohol, lighter, medium-bodied styles of wine for like 2 decades. It's just the wine industry is pretty slow on the uptake. But it also, I think, again, some of the biggest challenges is that people want to drink less but more often, but the problem was in the package. I know my partner doesn't drink that much wine. I open a bottle of wine, I'm having 2 glasses, and it goes off. You can't open a bottle of wine, have a glass a night over 5 days because it's just gross by the end. So that's the problem that needs to be solved. But I laugh about the industry, in my wine industry, my love for the wine industry is like only wine would come up with a wine preservation system, another industry, wine preservation industry, rather than address the actual packaging. And I'm not saying all wine should be in alternate packaging. I'm not saying that at all. It's for wines that are made to be drunk young, we should hardcore look at different packaging, and whether it be, Magnums or cask wine, the great, there's 200 ml of wine pouches. They're fantastic. Like that, then you can have a glass of wine that's a normal alcohol, but you don't have to open it up and then consume an entire bottle because it's going to go off, because that's a lot.
Is the infrastructure there to be able to produce packaging that solves that now?
Yeah.
It is there?
100%. Absolutely. Yes, we need to be more research, I think. Well, it's like canned wine in can. Canning wine is not the problem. It's having, dare I say, shit wine in can. Like, what if you put really good wine in can or really good wine in cask? And there are better cask options out there. Hey, tomorrow, they're a local producer, Cold Crew. They're both at Mould this weekend. I'm a big advocate for that. So there are options out there, and it comes down to a question of intent of, producers. So if one person does it, it's a curiosity. But if multiple people do it at the same time, it becomes a movement. And wearing my wine hat, I say, don't tell me we can't change people's views on packaging. We did it with screw cap.
Yeah, in this part of the world we did as well.
Oh, exactly. And people go, but wine in can, I don't get people drinking wine out of a can. It's like, well, you don't drink wine straight out of the bottle either, mate. So we pour it into a glass, it's okay. Just, you're not drinking it straight out of the pouch. You're pouring it into a glass of wine. You're enjoying this good experience. So there's less options. And that's, again, I'm speaking very much as myself, Dan Sims, not as on behalf of anyone. But I think 68% of the carbon imprint of the wine industry comes from packaging and transport. 68%. So if we're going to get to net zero, you cannot ignore that. Again, I wholeheartedly believe in Australia and Victoria, we've got the skills, we've got the know-how, we've got the resources, and we've got the brains, and we've got the leaders in this country to get ourselves out of this. People say we can't do this. I have full faith that we can innovate our way out of the challenges and engage with public. Don't tell me we can't do it. We've done it before. We'll do it again. But it comes back down to applying it and cheerleading. And I hope if anything,
you described yourself as a
cheerleader, to go, look, now let's go for it.
Dan, I've got 2 questions. So the penultimate question of the program is one that I've been asking in some other videos that we've done recently, and I'm really interested in the answer from every guest. It's always something unique and different. I'd like to know what is incredibly important to you, something specific that you pay attention to, that you focus on, that other people miss, and maybe consumers or clients, customers, guests, however you refer to anyone that you deal with, maybe even people that your colleagues, they seem to miss, not necessarily seem to miss this, but they don't see it as something that's as important as you believe it to be?
It's a tough one to answer. I think I'm not sure about what other people do. But I think it's a big asset for anyone. I think is being an observer, is observation and looking and watching and being open-minded enough and curious about what's happening in the greater world outside of, both in and outside of the industry. I love to be surrounded by people with different opinions. So you want to hear from a lot of everyone else. I think observing, listening and being curious, I think they're really key and paramount to anything and applicable to so many other industries. And that's back with compassion and empathy. I think that sets a framework. But yeah, I would probably call myself an observer. One of our values at Revel, we say we're radically curious, constantly looking, how do we improve? What could we do better? What are other people doing? And that also goes down to other trends that are outside of our own community and listening. Listening is one of the things that has been a lost art form in recent years. People like to talk a lot, but also, I know I certainly do talk a lot, but also like listening. And again, that was reiterated to me over at VinExpo, was to be there, listen, observe, and be part of. But yeah, do anything that's really, and at the end of the day, build something around community. If you've got good people around you, that's everything.
Thank you, Dan. The last question that I have for you on the show is a very short one. Love to know who you'd like to hear on the program.
Tell you what, someone is a very good friend and mentor of mine. She's an absolute legend of a human being, Angie Bradbury. She has been, again, a long-term friend and mentor. She was former sheriff of Wine Victoria before Stephanie. She's an insanely talented brand person, communicator, sees so much and is unafraid to be direct. But what I've always loved about Angie is she's got this brilliant way of holding up a mirror to you and almost like forcing you to look at it. And I think sometimes people get really nervous about that because they can see, they can look at all the cracks or whatever. And that's the same with any industry. And some people go, oh God, that's a bit too much. But I think then other people go, oh God, you're right. Okay, I'm curious. Okay, well, what should we do? And she's been instrumental certainly in my career in terms of navigating through a number of challenges. But yeah, she's an absolute legend, whether it be wine or hospitality or culture or brand. She can speak to it all.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. I'd love to chat with Angie, and I've really appreciated the chat with you. So thank you very much for joining me.
Mate, thanks so much and thanks everyone for listening in.
This program was produced by H Media. We'll see you soon.